Unaussprechlichen Ramblen.
My name is Marco Visconti, and through this podcast I will invite fellow magicians, occultists, artists, and mystics to ramble along with them and my supporters on Patreon. By doing so, I hope to introduce you all to a much wider perspective on magic than what we get nowadays from occult social media, which is frankly beginning to feel very stale, repetitive, and uninspired. If you want to be part of one of the next episodes, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/Marco Visconti by pledging at the Yesod tier or above. And now, on with the unspeakable rumbles. Good evening, everyone. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And welcome to episode 5 of Unaussprechlichen Ramblen. Tonight, we're possibly the most requested guest so far. I think this time we're gonna go more deep into, Thelema, what it's like to be a Thelemite in the 21st century, the experiences that both me and our guest, IAO131, had with Ordo Templarientis. But first, let me introduce him properly. So, IAO131 is known for his excellent books, Fresh Fever from the Skies, Naturalistic Occultism, An Introduction to Scientific Illuminism, and HRILIU, A Symbolic Exploration of the Gnostic Mass. He's been a member of the O.T.O for over a decade, I think. I'll ask him properly now shortly. And we met online. We met on the O.T.O circles online. We never met in the flesh. Today, he is definitely the primary force behind Thelemic Union, which is an organization dedicated to spreading the magical and philosophical system of Thelema. He aims to do this through fostering a secular, non-hierarchical community of Thelemites, disseminating well-researched and well-produced materials promoting Thelema, and representing Thelema and Thelemic values to interfaith communities and the world in general. Welcome, Mr. IAO131. welcome to this community of reprobates. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. It's nice to finally talk to you face to face.
Face to face, right? Yeah. I mean, because for those of you like watching here on the live, or if you're listening on the podcast, me and IAO131, we started corresponding through Facebook and through Facebook really, because the O.T.O doesn't have a centralized internal forum, because that would be too much of a progressive thinking. So we started talking on Facebook on the unofficial O.T.O Facebook group, and we really realized that we had a lot in common. Pretty much in 2017, almost to the day, when we realized that the fraternal group that we were members of and that we were dedicating so much time and so much energy was pretty much the hotbed of neo-fascist, really. So what do you remember of those days? Let's start from the bad first. Let's go there.
Oh boy. To answer your question from earlier, I was in O.T.O for about 10 years, almost exactly, about 2006 or 2007 until about 2017. I don't remember the exact dates because it's all kind of a blur. But I spent 10 years. I was basically every officer position that you could imagine, including master of a local body. Chartered initiator at one point, ordained priest at one point. So, I went through all the routes there.
All that there was to do, pretty much. Yeah.
Pretty much until you hang around for 20 more years and become a bishop or something like that. But yeah, what I remember is in 2016, on the day Trump was elected president, I was actually at O.T.O giving a lecture on the mysteries of O.T.O, some kind of weird forecasting of what was to come, was an intertwining of those two things a lot. And with the rise of Trump came the rise of people being a lot more vocal about their real opinions. There's a particular segment of O.T.O that is particularly Trump friendly. you might say. And they got louder and more virulent. So one example is I created the Thelemic Union, I believe in 2016, right around that same time. And as you know, might know from U.S. history, in the Civil War, there was a union and there was also a confederacy. So these people, of course, they went and created a Thelemic Confederacy group because, of course, it's awesome to align yourself with slave owners and that kind of thing.
Yeah, right.
But this was one of many groups. The other one I think was Thelema Uncucked or something like that. And there's a real breeding ground for a lot of terrible people and their terrible behavior.
Something that I want to ask you right away, if it's possible, was this the first time? I mean, you already told us you were such like you were like a cardinal point of the O.T.O, especially in the Bay Area. Like you were a master of the lodge, and you were organizing all these things. You were pretty much, you and I guess Joseph Thebes were the ones that actually started the Reddit group as well many years before. So pretty much you were one of the people like trying to push Thelema and the O.T.O in the in social media pretty much. I remember when I joined a few years after you, and I remember that I was actually surprised and finally see the O.T.O on social media. I was like, well, maybe they are doing something good. Maybe they are. Let's try and be part of this. But my question is, so you had a general understanding of the O.T.O. I mean, pretty more than general. You never noticed that there was this hotbed of reactionaries, traditionalists, if we want to say, because I tell you, like in Italy, where I'm from, and when I first joined, the reason why I didn't join back in the 90s, it's because pretty much the people in Rome were all fascist, and that's it. And the people that are the king of Italy right now, it's the same person that was there at the beginning. So let's say possibly there is some sort of flirting with the O.T.O with these ideas. And for those of you who don't know, when I say king, it's the grand master of a given kingdom of the O.T.O. Imagine like each kingdom, which is each nation, has a grand lodge. And the Grand Lodge is governed by a Grand Master, which technical mystical title is King. Yeah, it's fun stuff. So back to the question, like, did you never notice this before?
I certainly noticed certain individuals had reactionary views and were kind of aligned with it. I mostly thought they kept pretty quiet about those views. Or I didn't I knew about them somehow, and I knew I could, think of a few people in particular that espouse, what we came to call, like alt-right views. But they seem kind of few and far between, unconnected, and in particular not particularly vocal. That's why I said, when Trump came into power as the president, I really noticed the increase in volume of it. And that is concerning, but the most concerning thing to me was people in positions of authority and power espousing these views, and that has a real effect. Just as we saw Trump's behavior and the things he would say, it kind of gave an okay to a lot of normal people who weren't president to speak and act in intolerant ways as well. So it was almost like a little microcosm in O.T.O of that happening. But it really was not huge on my radar before 2016.
Something that, like, I mean, I remember that one person here in the UK used to tell me that I should have not worried about it all, because in the end, the O.T.O is how did they say it? It's one of these usual tricks that they use with words, like, well, the O.T.O is a mirror of society. So if society is fascist right now, the O.T.O has to be fascist. Like when you say it out loud, it's so ridiculous.
That's ridiculous too.
Right, but
right.
So
I've heard that too.
Yeah, I mean, which is like, for me, it makes no sense, because I mean, if you look at I know you're very familiar, but for those of you here, if you look at what the O.T.O was supposed to be, you look at the foundation documents like Liber 101, Liber 194. I mean, those are all the O.T.O should be more something of almost like a socialist enclave, because like, it's really about Yes, there's a strong element of I would say aristocracy, but it's more an aristocracy of the soul that is available to every woman, because every woman, every man, and every woman is a star, according to the law of Thelema.
I think there's a lot of emphasis in Liber 101 that you mentioned. It's kind of like a society of mutual aid,
Yeah.
which is very not what greater society is. And I think the fact that O.T.O just naturally reflects society is kind of a failing of O.T.O, that it lacks a kind of self-definition and direction, and therefore lets itself lapse into basically being a reflection of general culture instead of what it was intended to be. Its true will, so to speak,
Yeah.
was lost. Yeah.
Well, I think we will come back to the O.T.O a little bit,
Sure, we
but
will.
I want. I mean, we have to. I mean, it's pretty much the experience that binds us. I have a lot of questions from people of the community, and as usual, thank you all for sending questions. It's really nice to see that there's so much engagement. I mean, when I send the questions to IAO131, I guess you two were surprised because you're used to Thelemites not engaging pretty much, right? And so
Right.
one question from Jill. And okay, we're going on tangent now. And the question is, you have commented on the importance of applying the philosophy of Thelema to your actual life, having a regular magical practice. Can you share some of the ways you apply the philosophy of Thelema to your day-to-day life, as well as perhaps the basic structure of your daily magical practice?
That's a great question. That guy probably follows my Twitter, and thank you for that. So, it is, I'd say the philosophy of Thelema, as opposed to the, say, occultism of Thelema, has really been my focus. The book Fresh Fever from Skies is basically all about Thelemic philosophy, and so it's a kind of an area that's most interesting to me and most important to me. And, I find that a lot of Thelemites, they're basically Sunday Thelemites, right? They come for the Gnostic Mass. Maybe they say will or something like that. But aside from that, the law of Thelema or the philosophy of Thelema doesn't seem to really enter their life in the way that they change their behavior or change themselves. Obviously, everyone has their own way of doing things, but there seems to be also a real emphasis on books, reading books, as opposed to causing change in the world. And I'm a very kind of earthy person. I like to see manifestation. I like to see change, and not just kind of mental masturbation, so to speak. So that's kind of my emphasis. And, applying Thelema to daily life it's a really big question, and I think everyone's going to do it differently, obviously based on your understanding of Thelema and what that entails. I think it's really important that that the philosophy connects with the earth, that it actually applies to real life. So it really anything. There is politics, for example. What are your political views? How do you understand the importance of resources and where they should go in society? That should be based on your Thelemic principles. Presumably, just to give an example, that each person should be able to develop to their full capacity. And what does that mean? Well, for certain people, that might mean certain political views of, say, a stronger social net, and advocating for that politically. I also mean it just on a more personal level of, if you believe that in order to do your will, you have to be a balanced person, for example. Equilibrium is a virtue of the magician, right? That should be applied to your life in very concrete ways. If you're emotionally reactive and you don't really have control over yourself, then you're not applying that philosophy to daily life, right? Are you imposing your morality on other people, then I would say you're not applying that philosophy to your daily life. In relationships, that's a big subject. Are you allowing that person the freedom to be themselves and express themselves freely, personally and sexually, I guess? That is an important thing to think about. And it really applies to all facets of life. Theoretically, Thelema applies to everything. I used to say a lot that it's an all-encompassing paradigm, because people often get really caught up that it's like it's like horny occultism, or like, Golden Dawn 2.0. It's like a flavor of the occult that's like edgy and cool, which, yeah, I guess it is, but that's just like one tiny piece of the puzzle. It's really meant to be kind of a worldview, a life philosophy that's able to guide you in your choices.
Do you think that some people think of Thelema, as you say, like Golden Dawn 2.0 or horny occultism? It's because they try to emulate Crowley, uh,
Right.
as opposed to becoming Thelemites themselves, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of cool stuff that he did, and a lot of stuff that might be fun to copy and all that, but the ultimate message of Thelema is for you to ultimately be yourself and find your own way. So not everyone needs to have their significant other shit on them. Not everyone needs to go out to the desert and invoke Qurans on. um, those are all cool and stuff, but when you really get down to it, you have to find your own way, your own path, and be creative in your own way. I see a lot of people basically emulating Crowley's style, um, emulating the things he does. Like, I'm sure you've seen some of these received texts, but they're like weird, like degraded forms of the Book of the Law, rather than being in their own voice. Um, and so, yeah, it's really a lot of people grasping onto the personality of Crowley. Um, and as much as people say, oh, Crowley isn't Thelema, Crowleyanity is not Thelema, I think people still do kind of worship the personality. Um, anyway.
It's funny you mentioned this because as you know, I'm trying to create this thing called like post-Thelemic. I wrote this post-Thelemic manifesto, and the
Hmm.
first thing that people told me, well, I was like, well, this is not the Book of the Law. It's like, yeah, that's the point. This is not supposed to be another Book of the Law. And do, I mean, I want to stay here for a second. Like, do you think there's a way out? Do you think Dilemma as a future, or are we just I mean, especially people like me and you, who've been involved in this for so long now? Are we mad, or there is
Yeah.
a way out?
Yeah, I don't think Thelema's ever going to become the world religion, and if it did, it would probably suck a lot. um, it would probably be terrible, just like Christianity in at least America. It's basically the exact opposite of what Christianity was meant to be, in my view, and I believe that would happen with Thelema if it grew too big as well. But we are a small group of people, and there have been some kind of centralized areas where people come and learn about it. I think we're in a kind of an era or an age of dispersion, where we're becoming more decentralized, which means things will become more diverse, but they also, like I said, they won't be as centralized. So they may not be as loud, as big, as traditional looking. And I think in a lot of ways, the best version of Thelema will win, so to speak. Over time, certain people's ideas will catch on, other ideas will fade away, and we'll see an evolution of the current that is unpredictable. And there might be, kind of the age of silence before an age of speech, right? So we might be in one of those times now. It certainly seems at least we're in a kind of a dispersion of the traditional modes of Thelema.
Going forward, and this is a question from Mars, and he's actually asking, can you say a few words about the yamas and niyamas of Thelema? Would you still formulate them today exactly as you did in the past? And how do you best integrate them in your daily life, especially, as you said, in crazy times of dispersions like this? And I would also like to add something, because I remember that
Yeah.
the discussion on the Yama Niyama of Dilemma, and the way you formulated it, I remember you were one of the first people actually, making a meme about it. Back when nobody was doing that,
The
and in
meme master, yeah.
fact, it's your fault. It's all your fault. But I remember that one of the things that actually caught a lot of people, fascinated a lot of people, is the fact that you would describe the Niyama of Dilemma as mind your business. I mean, Crowley does it as well, obviously, but you were like, you put it out there. My point is that, as you remember, we didn't mind our business, both me and you, but when
Right.
when Charlottesville went down, when we went there, telling people, shut the fuck up, don't do this.
Yeah.
So how would you answer all this, right?
Yeah. Well, to answer the question of would I formulate it the same way right now, probably not. But in the beginning of Fresh Fever, I say, a lot of people come to me and say, oh, well, I like some of your stuff, but I don't agree with some things you say. And my answer is always, neither do I. I don't even agree with some of the things I wrote. Sometimes they were more experimental. Sometimes I've grown and changed my view. But for those who don't know, it's this idea that yama and niyama are kind of the ethics, the do's and don'ts of yoga. And in Thelema, there's one article I wrote where the yama, Crowley actually explicitly says the yama of Thelema is do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, in the sense that thou hast no right but to do thy will, right? You have to adhere to your will and nothing else. And the niyama are traditionally the virtues that go along with that, kind of positive virtues. And Crowley in 8 lectures on yoga actually goes through a bunch of different virtues that are based on kind of planetary attributions, if I recall correctly, which are interesting. But I wanted this kind of, mirror image of like one thing is do what thou wilt, the other thing is minding your own business in a way, letting other people do their will, which I think is kind of an aesthetically pleasing arrangement, at least intellectually. And I think it's kind of thought-provoking as well. I do agree with Crowley's general idea of mind your own business in most cases, but I think he himself also understood that there's some nuance. So there's the quote that we're infinitely tolerant, save of intolerance. All right, so we're infinitely tolerant. I would identify that a lot with the mind your own business. Save of intolerance. There are some things that are required to address and to fight back against. I think a lot of people have kind of a really simplistic, maybe even childish view of politics, where you can kind of say like one general principle is the way to go, like just leave everyone alone and everything will be fine. Well, the world doesn't really operate in that kind of philosophical vacuum. For example, if the government did nothing, corporations would take over and control our lives as they kind
Pretty
of
much
are right now.
right
Yeah.
now, exactly.
Right. There are forces at work that don't allow these things in a pure form. So, in your mind your own business in all cases might sound good, but there are there's clearly cases where you have to speak up. And for me, the line was overt bigotry from a public figure of authority in O.T.O.
If you don't say the name, I'll say it.
Uh-huh.
It was James Wasserman. I'm gonna say
Right.
it out loud.
Yeah.
So I
Wasserman, yeah. So he was, as you guys probably know, he was a 9th degree O.T.O. I would argue he's actually the most public, or was, he's deceased now, but he was the most public figure of O.T.O. I think he probably even had a little more reach than Lon Duquette in some ways. He was on television
absolutely,
shows.
absolutely. He
Yeah.
definitely had the
Mhm.
biggest profile. Was it on Ancient Aliens or something like that? It was on TV. I
He was
mean,
like he was on TV. He was on George Nuri, Coast to Coast, and again, you can't have this black and white view of things. Clearly, Wasserman did some things that were interesting, that were important. He wrote some books out there that have nothing to do with politics that are great. The politics ones are trash, in my opinion. But he was a human being, right? That being said, he was an authority figure in O.T.O. that a lot of people looked up to, a lot of people emulated, were part of his social group, part of his AA that he was associated with, and he had a lot of clout. And for him to be overtly bigoted in various ways was a really big line for me,
not just for
especially
you, for me as well, and from
right.
many others. I mean, just to let you know, all of you listening, it wasn't just me and IAO131. There were honestly hundreds of people across the world that were like, no, this is not right. The problem is that we were all of a low degree. Like
Right.
everybody at the top, the O.T.O is hierarchical, and the O.T.O, I know ideally that would work as a hierarchy if the people at the top would be, the kind of philosopher kings that they're supposed to be, the saints of the 9th degree. I mean, this is the terms that if you want to engage with the mysticism of the system, you hear this. The 9th degree is a saint, okay? And well, they didn't really act as saints. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the issues was that the O.T.O leaders were abiding too much by this mind your own business philosophy. I'm not sure they really thought of it that way. I think they were just protecting their friends and all that. But as far as I can tell, Wasserman never suffered any consequences, at least in any public way. At one point, he supposedly apologized, but it was just another rant online where he, said he was persecuted like the Jews and things like that for people criticizing him online. And so, in my opinion, these kind of reactionary people and philosophies, they only grow because so many people in positions of power and authority basically do nothing to challenge it. They allow it to happen. And this is the case in greater society as well. When people like minorities are struggling to fight for their rights, it's not the overt Nazis that are the biggest problems. It's the middle of the road, moderate, middle class people who don't like conflict and don't like trouble to be stirred up. They're the ones that really stand in the way because they value a kind of appearance of peace over the presence of justice, to quote MLK. That kind of mind your own business, it's like saying in a garden, you should just let the weeds grow. It's fine, right? No, you have to pull out the weeds in order for the garden to grow in a healthy way.
Well, I want to thank you for explaining it out loud, because I can tell you, and you're aware of that as well, there's still a lot of people out there, always from this more I don't even know if it's right to call it alt-right anymore, straight up fascist sides of Thelema, that will say, well, you should mind your own business and let me be a Nazi, pretty much. I think that it's important to say out there, no, you shouldn't be a Nazi because that's you're going to impede the true will of others if you're a Nazi, and that's not what's Thelema is supposed to do, at least. Let's move on a little bit. Let's go back to the theory in practice. Here's a question from Ryan, and it says, I recently read your posts on mysticism in Thelema in theory and practice. You often draw parallels with Eastern mysticism in describing the Thelemic model. Are there any key differences in Thelemic mysticism and Eastern mysticism in your view? And do you see them as parallel roadmaps via different practices?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. My first kind of response is that there's no such thing as Eastern mysticism. It's just kind of a term that applies to a huge amount of different mystic systems that they definitely bear resemblance to one another, but some are, back in the day, there were different philosophies, different schools that kind of fought each other intellectually. They did not see each other as the same. But what I can tell you is that Crowley definitely saw these things as basically different forms, different degraded ways of communicating the same ultimate truth, the same ultimate underlying truth. And he saw that truth as essentially, for lack of a better word, this kind of transcendent unity that underlies everything metaphysically, that you yourself are in the end of the analysis. It's you. One thing that I think differentiates some of the Eastern mysticism from Thelemic mysticism is that the ultimate goal of a lot of this, of certain Eastern types of mysticism, definitely not all of them, but some of them are about kind of dissolving yourself into the infinite, and then that's it. There is no regard for your own, personality, your own mind and body in its kind of unique position in the world. Whereas Thelema it's kind of inside out, where it starts with the individual, right? And you have to take care of your body in a way that's good for you, grow your mind in a balanced way that's unique to you and your position in the world, as well as seeking that transcendent unity. So maybe the ego is obliterated in Thelemic mysticism in a similar way in Eastern mysticism. But I do think there is an element of staying true to the individual and its unique point of view, so to speak, that is often not spoken much about or given much credence in certain forms of Eastern mysticism.
Would you say that, which is something I like to say a lot, that Thelema can be understood to a degree as the Zen of the West?
As what?
as the Zen of the West.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities there. That again, there's different forms of Zen as well, but there's some really powerful. I think Zen is one of those Eastern things that is an exception to what I was talking about, where they seem to understand that obliterating duality is not the end of the game. You still have to, you still have to do the basics of life, right? You still have to chop wood and carry water. And there are definitely some Eastern philosophies that are more embodied, right? They don't view the body as evil or something to just that's just in the way of truth. They view it as an expression of the divine, as a kind of medium of expression, and has its own divinity. So there's a lot of similarities there with the Thelemic worldview, I think, for sure.
So this is we're going back to actually moving away from theory and practice and go back more to structures for a second. And this is a question from Richard and then one from Connor that they just like kind of build on each other. And
Uh-huh.
the question goes as the old hierarchical orders are left behind and Thelema decentralizes, do you think we need a new structure or language to describe magical achievements that leave behind the notions of the and traditions of grades, for instance, neophyte, adept, master, and then the signs, the dramatic initiations, the secrets, the inner, outer, and third orders, and maybe even Hermetic Kabbalah? And if so, what do you think it might look like?
That's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Right? Like, what,
Yeah.
how are we going to build the future, pretty much?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the new year just started, and you're trying to build a whole new one after that. But no, I think actually, I think that's accurate. I think first of all, I think people get caught up in the AA systems terminology a lot with the grades. I think it's a lot. Personally, for me, it's a lot of claptrap. It's a lot of titles. A lot of it kind of feels like a video game sometimes, like you're leveling up into neophyte or something like that once you get enough experience points, and it doesn't seem to have much of a direct connection with people's actually lived experience of themselves in the world. um, I do think there are some problematic aspects of knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel as a concept. I think it could be fleshed out in certain ways. I think it could be renamed like Crowley did himself. um,
How would
I
you
do.
how would you rename it?
I'm not sure. I don't have a beautiful, concise answer for that, but I do think that as Crowley said multiple times, he chose this because it was ridiculous, that no one would take it seriously, and he was 100% wrong about that. People absolutely take it literally and
Absolutely
seriously.
serious. Yep.
Yeah, and you can cherry pick quotes to make it seem like he believed that it was a literal thing or whatever, but that term is very much for a kind of trying to shock the rational mind because it's so dumb. No one would ever build a metaphysical system on that idea. Well, that people definitely have. Um,
We know some of them. Yeah.
right? Yeah, I mean, you know, uh, but there are other systems. There's that Thelemic mysticism article that the one guy earlier was mentioning in his question, where I talked about there's actually a lot of different names for very similar concepts. I think some are better in that they don't imply such a weird metaphysical system, like something as simple as illumination might even be better. And I think there's a very strong adherence to these terms based on aesthetics, right? Because it's cool, it's edgy, it's occult, it's weird and mysterious. And I think that has some compelling power to draw people into the path. But I also think it could easily serve to obscure the path where people are, they want clout because they have a certain colored robe and a certain numerical equation after their name. None of that matters. And, Crowley was uniquely kind of straightforward about how he himself thought it was kind of ridiculous to count all these titles and stuff. Like there's one part of the Equinox where he spends like 4 pages listing every Masonic title that he has just to be ridiculous. So I think we could actually follow Crowley's lead a little better and not take the names as seriously and really look at kind of the underlying reality of what exactly is going on in these attainments, and trying to achieve them rather than um, you know hoping for a new title or a new badge on your robe or something like that.
You know, something that I discovered into the last year and a half of running this community is that, and it's something actually I'm writing a post about it. It will be coming out in the next few weeks. I try to become as decentralized as possible. We discussed this in previous times, and not calling myself. No, you're not. I mean, I'm a member of the AA. I've been a member of the AA for many years, 25 years now. I have a grade, which is maybe even a high grade, but I never said it out loud. I never promoted me as with a grade. Well, this has been actually detrimental in me being able to actually establish myself as somebody that people should listen to, because as you said, there's still an obsession on it doesn't matter who this person is, it doesn't matter what this person has done, it doesn't matter what this person stalks, but what matters is, as you said, what kind of strange equation he has next to his name. Something that I want to say that all of you here know very well. In recent years there's been this race to crossing the abyss. Everybody and their mothers have crossed the abyss right now. Everybody has done that. You go on Discord for like 2 months, and that's it. You cross the abyss. That's it. So you are, and suddenly you become it's not even more. It's not about becoming, to establish clout in these communities. It's not about even becoming an adept anymore or a master. No, it's like becoming God directly. Do you think we can get rid of this perspective, or should we just get rid of it all and start from zero? That's what I'm actually wondering myself.
I think that if people study the Book of the Law, people study the holy books, and they do the work themselves, they will find new ways to speak about these things, new ways to achieve these things. But I do think there's something about human nature, maybe our kind of profane nature, that we look for father figures and mother figures, we look for authorities, and the way we do that is when people kind of project their authority through different ways, listing all their titles and all that is kind of a common way. Signing your name with 8 = 3 or 9 = 2 or 12 = -1, whatever it is, right? I think people do that to, like you say, get clout, and it seems almost impossible that we could prevent people from viewing that as real and something substantial, just because people look for that kind of stuff, at least when they're not very well informed themselves. That how would they know any better, right? But I do think it's possible in the future that we could build a kind of language and a community that understands these things in a more clear way, understands, able to identify actual authority coming from lived experience rather than, say, the number after your name that you gave yourself, right?
Exactly. I mean, there's one of the reasons why I'm sad that the O.T.O is in the state it is, because as you both know, because we both went through that degree, there is a specific degree in O.T.O, which I'm not gonna just speak about plainly, maybe one day, because I have no shame, as you know. But there's a specific degree which is called Perfect Initiate, whereby you're pretty much told all this degree matters nothing, right? Like, yeah, you toiled for years to accumulate all these important accolades. Nothing matters. What matters is devotion to Babylon and to try and understand the dance of Babylon in the cosmos. But it seems to me that we're still not there yet.
I think there's a long way to go in terms of understanding things differently. And I do think it's unfortunate that the terms are so arcane and that people haven't really done much work to find new ways of expressing those same ideas.
I mean, maybe it's down to people like you and me and the other peoples here. I mean, here in this community, all of you guys are fantastic, and I always say so. So I don't know. Maybe as we pass the baton to the new generation,
right?
Which is, I'm old, I want to retire. That's the reality of that. We'll see. We have one question before opening the floor. One question from Connor, and it ties directly with the one from Richard. Connor says, I'm actually curious about how you both, me and you, see Thelema post-O.T.O. Especially it seems that the organization is on its way out. We can hope. especially as it relates to individuals. Other groups, such as the Typhonian Order, Thelemic Union, patron communities like this one, or maybe even, and shudders, content creators. What right? What do you both think? So me and you, what do we think will happen as the O.T.O shrinks? First of all, do you agree that the O.T.O is shrinking?
I think it probably is. I think, to take a step back, I think it's not as big as people realize or they think. O.T.O is probably 2,000 or less members, and of those members, there's probably 100 that do pretty much all the work and do all the lectures, run all the bodies, that kind of thing.
Me and
It's
you
a, it's a
we're in that group because we were.
yeah, it's kind of a general principle that 2% of the people do 90% of the work, that kind of thing. It happens in business and stuff, but I think people, it projects itself as being much larger, much more established than it actually is. I do not think it's very big. I think another organization could theoretically overtake it in numbers, without much difficulty, really, if they had good people that were had a solid system and could promote it well. I do think the future of Thelema is more decentralized. I don't think people want a centralized church of Thelema for the most part. And in the same way that we think of O.T.O as being bigger than it is, I think people think that disconnected kind of internet Thelemites are smaller than they are. There are many thousands of Thelemites out there who see this kind of stuff that's going on with O.T.O and they just want nothing to do with it, and you would never know, really. So I think there's a lot more people out there interested in Thelema than people realize, which also means there's a lot of potential to regroup people in new constellations, right? New formations that may not look like the old ones. I personally don't think the order system is really in for the future. I don't mean that it's completely terrible or that it has nothing to offer. I mean that it is, it's like riding on a horse to get to a city instead of a car. Like, you can do it, but it's not efficient. It's painful. It smells bad, right? I think there are better methods that are possible, and I want to see what works. And I think that's kind of a trial and error. Like, people will try things like yourself, your Discord community or Patreon community. I think that is one example of a new way of organizing people into a community that is, it's very new, but I think we will see if it's how successful it is, what it creates. And I think there will be other forms of community, other forms of sharing and teaching and learning that come about that look nothing like the O.T.O system of initiations, the Freemasonic system, or the kind of Catholic Church wannabe EGC system.
We're going to move on now on to like opening the floor for more questions. Let me just change a little bit here. All right, gallery. Hello, everyone. So, Peter is asking, is it important to have in-person initiation ceremonies? Do you think it is important?
I think there is a value to it. Do I think it's necessary to do your true will? No. Do I think it's necessary to attain to the highest heights? No. But I do think it has a kind of value. I think there's different kinds of initiation that get kind of blurred. The term has multiple meanings. So, curly means initiation to basically mean the system of attainment, right? But for a lot of groups throughout history, really, in pretty much every culture, an initiation was a bringing of someone into the community. Not necessarily a marker of them being spiritually, a master or something, but it makes them kind of an adult as part of a community. And something, just as O.T.O is an example, that initiation is an experience of being brought into a group of people who all share the same experience, who all share the same kind of symbol set, and they can understand things similarly and speak in a similar way. As part of a community that shares the same values, at least in theory. In practice, I don't Turns out that way.
It didn't turn out to be
right. But I do think there is potentially some value for some people to go through that, just in the sense that dramatic ritual is one of the oldest forms of teaching, of initiatory teaching as well. And I think there could be some way to make that valuable. But I do think it is probably for kind of a select few. Um, I don't think a lot of people really, I don't want to speak for other people too much, but I don't think a lot of people really get that much out of it other than like, wow, that was cool. So it does have potential value, does have potential to be important, but I do think it takes a certain type of person.
To get it. Yeah, I get it. Another question that goes on, for pretty much follows this one, and they're asking, what's important to you right now? That's a very wide question, actually. I would say, I mean, it's open. What is important to you right now? As a Thelemite, I would suggest.
Right. Yeah. What is important to me? I think it is for me. I'm still in this kind of process of trying to understand myself and my place in the Thelemic culture. I don't know if I quite fit in certain ways. I'm trying to find different ways that kind of use my skills in terms of writing and things like that are still beneficial to people. So for me, I think it's important for me to find ways that I can connect with the community, find ways that can still influence the future of Thelema in a positive direction. Personally, I have certain values, certain directions I want to see Thelema go, frankly. And I think one of those is less of an insistence on orders and churches. I think one of those is being more political in the sense of not neglecting the material world and the things that happen outside of yourself, a less solipsistic view of Thelema, where in fact we are in an interconnected web with each other. And we have to think about that in a more than childish way of I have mine and fuck you, basically.
Yeah.
Right. I think Thelema naturally is a very selfish kind of philosophy for a lot of people, but I think that's also an extremely narrow view of the self and of just understanding the practicalities of life and the material world. People, ironically, I talk a lot about philosophy in my books, but I do think there's kind of a hyper intellectual culture around Thelema that is off-putting to a lot of people. That it's like a secret code you have to crack in order to even understand the most basic thing. So just being clear, being straightforward about what these things mean and how they might affect you. That's a flavor of Thelema that I'd like to see more of, and less blah blah, less gematria. I think those are fun.
Kabbalics, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, Kabbalics, yeah, exactly. Again, I think people kind of treat it like a video game where you get the right code or the right symbol and it'll unlock the truth or something. I'm not so much of a fan of that kind of flavor.
Which is interesting you mentioned that, because I mentioned that a lot. At the same time, I've been trying to teach magic. I've been trying to create here on this community like a magical primer. Imagine like a Long Ducat book, but multimedia, like which
Nice.
And you always start, and there's a lesson at the beginning where I introduced the Liber 777, and of course people say they like it, and then they hate it because they realize the nature of the Kabbalics over there. So,
right. Yeah. It is. Yeah. It's not. It's something that is very easily misused, I think, to say the least.
We have time for one final question, and this is from Bryce. We touched on this, but maybe it's good to go back to the beginning, right? And he asks, how do you think the alt-right and fascism even got a foothold in Thelema? It seems like cognitive dissonance to me. I mean, you made a meme about that, right?
That's why I laughed, yeah. I personally think that these kind of far-right ideologies that view certain classes of people as subhuman or as lesser than others is inherently against the philosophy of Thelema. That's as clear as I can put it. That if you view the world that way, then Thelema is not for you. But the thing is Thelema is often a magical mirror, right? It reflects back to your own values in a lot of ways. And people have a very strong tendency to come at Thelema with a pre-held belief and then fitting the facts to that pre-held belief. So in my view, for example, I think Wasserman is one of the most extreme, obvious and public examples of this, where he was basically a Fox News grandpa, right? He consumed all this right-wing propaganda that, frankly, I think the slightly mature person would understand is bullshit propaganda. Not that MSNBC is any better or anything like that,
No, of course.
but he basically writes these books that could basically be, it's Tucker Carlson with an occult history edge to it, basically, right? It's this weird kind of Fox News libertarianism where he started with this belief and basically started fitting everything to that. Obviously, Crowley was a very complex character. He had different sympathies. He spoke about different people in ways that we don't think about them now. Like, for example, being interested in getting Hitler the Book of the Law might rub people the wrong way, right? Obviously, he had his own kind of motives in doing that. But my point is there's always something that you can find that will reflect your pre-held belief, and I think that includes fascists and people that are into monarchy and all sorts of weird stuff. You can find Crowley on coke somewhere promoting that, probably, right?
Yeah, on a four binge coke binge writing.
Exactly,
Mania
especially on those.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
I just want to like ask you one final question myself. Like, I obviously, I agree with you. I agree that Thelema has
Good.
no space for this kind of ideas, but yet you will still get some people that they say, okay, but it's not just about Crowley. Crowley was, as you say, Crowley was million of people in one, right? And Crowley was the one that I think Nina Cunard described as the best anti-fascist in London, and the one that would be like speaking in terrible ways of everybody, really. But there's some others, some other critics out there. Let's not name names because we don't want to give them too much spotlight. But there are critics that maybe they have a point. Like, what about chapter 3 of the Book of the Law? What about certain like straight aristocracy of? It's not the aristocracy of the soul. It's really like about like how this will that almost becomes the will to power of Nietzsche, right? Like almost like very aggressive kind of will. How do you think this? I mean, I think this can fit, but how would you say it fits?
Mhm. You know, at the end of the day, it's just me saying that I don't agree with these things. And people are free to draw their own conclusions and find their own truth in it, even if it's a dumb fascist truth or whatever. I think there's a lot of different ways to interpret Thelema, and I think a lot of them are more transgressive than people give it credit for. So there's something that I've been talking with some people about where there's basically a consensus Thelema that's developing, a kind of exoteric Thelema that is kind of a new age liberal Thelema where do no harm is basically the idea. I don't think that's exactly right either. I think that's almost a kind of mirror image of this kind of like hyper violent fascist, let's just crush people philosophy. And so I think as long as we have one side that's going a little too far, we're gonna have the other side come as well.
Mhm.
And we have to find some kind of something that's more true to the material, something that's more realistic, maybe something that has more equilibrium than just, oh, Thelema is about, like being your best self and like being happy and letting other people be happy. It's like, it's a valid point. What about chapter 3, right? Well,
Yeah,
there's all this war and sacrificing cattle and stuff. And it's like, well, people just kind of ignore that stuff. It's one of the ways in which I think Thelema might develop in the future is people who are able to take into account some of those more martial aspects, but not in like an 8-year-old's way of like, I want a toy and so I'm going to like punch you for it, right? It's there are, for example, even in the way we're talking about of fighting against bigotry, you know, we have the luxury of fighting about it on social media. We may not have that luxury forever. If these forces gain power, there might actually be a time where we need to physically, in other ways, do combat against the forces of oppression and tyranny.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think the kind of consensus thelema that we should all just get along falls apart. And I think there is a value to understanding the kind of warlike mentality, but you know, with also being true to the other aspects
Yeah,
of thelema.
absolutely. I think you nailed the point perfectly. All right. Well, I think that's it for us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Where can people find you? Tell us a little bit about Thelemic Union as well. So to wrap it up, what you guys do over
Sure.
Thelemic Union?
We have secret meetings and secret handshakes. Just kidding. ThelemicUnion.com is pretty much where you'll find me. I basically run the site. But you know, Thelemic Union, my original view was to have a lot of people of diverse views sending in articles, not necessarily because I agree with them, because I don't agree with about 80% of what's on there, but to start conversations. Because my opinion is that the current is very weak right now. That there is, as much as we don't like content creators, at least they're creating something. At least they're doing something and creating some kind of waves out there. Obviously, I think there's better, more substantial ways of doing things, but I don't see a huge amount about it, or it's the same kind of tired like math problem that equals 93, or the saying that will is not want for the 500 millionth time. Right. So what I like to see are articles and different types of thought that stimulate people to think, to challenge their pre-held beliefs, or just clarify their own understanding of Thelema by reading these things. So, you know, it's open to any of you guys, to anyone, to submit articles. You can always send them to thelemicunion@gmail.com and I'll check them out. And you know, we have different stuff on there as well. There's some YouTube videos. There's a course on magic in terms of getting a very basic magical practice started. There's some materials to print out for groups that's free. Just go to thelemicunion.com, click on all those links, and you know, check it out.
That's it. Fantastic. I will put all the links in the podcast notes when this comes out. Well, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It was a pleasure to see you, like talk to you directly after all these years.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I guess that the pandemic allowed all of us to become less camera shy and be, you know, here in front of everybody. Thank you all once again for being here tonight. As usual, it's a pleasure. And do what the will shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will.